Mine does. There. We are live.
There
All
we
right,
go.
so.
Hang on, I gotta figure out how to quiet my phone.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
All right. So we're ready. Okay, let's do this. So I will intro. All right, this afternoon we are thrilled to welcome our friend, Atheist Captain America, also known as Andrew Seidel from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, back to our show for the, I've lost count of how many times, but he is the thing of Ken Ham's nightmares, and we are here to talk about the super sexy Johnson Amendment.
Yeah.
That's how you proposed it to us in our Twitter chat is, you know, we had a real hot topic to talk about.
I mean, it does not get hotter than the Johnson Amendment.
I know it gets people really excited because they know exactly what it pertains to, why it's important, and why it matters. Yep. So it gets people
all riled up.
And it's a good thing that there's not a lot of stuff going out by someone about, you know, kneeling and First Amendment and all that to distract people from it too. I mean, it's a good thing we don't have those types of distractions happening.
Yeah, that could be very detrimental to our cause. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's just start with what's the Johnson Amendment? Because, I mean, I'm sure everybody that's listening already knows, but let's pretend that they don't and explain it to all of us like we're five.
Sure. I mean, so it really is an important rule. Basically, the Johnson Amendment says that all 501c3 organizations, all charities, cannot endorse political candidates or use tax-exempt donations and tax-free property for partisan political campaigns. Okay, so we're perfectly able to talk about issues such as gay marriage and abortion and civil rights, and churches maybe could spend a little more time talking about the latter and a little less time talking about the former. But we can't endorse or be seen to be endorsing or coming out against a political candidate. So basically, the rule doesn't really prevent pastors or me from doing anything in my private capacity, right? I can still on my private Twitter and Facebook and among my friends, I can tell them who I'm voting for and things like that. But you know, pastors can't do it on church letterhead, and they can't get up in the pulpit and say, vote for X or you're going to go to hell. And again, this is a pretty common sense rule, and it applies to all charities. And basically, it's saying we want charitable donations to go to charitable works. So it doesn't single out or pick on churches, but it is a very just simple and kind of elegant rule that allows for churches and nonprofits to do the work they need to do, but not get mixed up in political campaigns.
Which makes sense. Common sense.
It does. It absolutely does.
To talk about repealing that, though, so something that's so common sense, why?
Well, I mean, there's two reasons: money and power. It's not anything new. Churches are after more money and more power, and there are a couple reasons that they'll get that. But I mean, it might be useful first to address they have a very a popular argument, and Trump has adopted this argument for them. The Department of Justice has adopted it in part two, and they're saying, well, hey, we have a free speech right to endorse whoever we want, and that's not true, because they're forgetting this one basic kind of critical fact, and it's that tax exemption is a privilege. It's not a right. Yeah. And so strings can be attached to that privilege, and one of the strings the government has attached to that particular privilege is the Johnson Amendment. So basically the government's saying, yeah, you have a free speech right, and if you want to endorse somebody, that's fine, go ahead, but you can be tax exempt. Right, and the government is perfectly able to do that. There's absolutely no problem doing that. So I think the real question then becomes what you asked, which is, well, why are they doing this? And it's because of money and power. It is the free speech argument is a red herring. It is completely irrelevant, and actually one of the courts have already rejected that argument. The real issue is churches want more money and more power. And if the Johnson Amendment goes away, it is not a stretch to say that millions, and I think it's very feasible that billions of dollars will flow into churches, and they will become unregulated super PACs. I mean,
Right. That's what I was going to say. It's like, what separates that at that point? What separates them from being just faith-based super PACs?
Nothing, and it'll actually even be worse than that. And I can explain why in a minute. But yeah, it'll be. I mean, this will make the Citizens United decision that pissed everybody off look like, I mean, like child's play by comparison. It will completely alter the political and election landscape forever in this country, forever.
Well, and we're already dealing with the fact that it seems like religion encroaches on politics as Absolutely. It is. So this is just taking it to 11 if this gets repealed.
And yes, and I mean, I appreciate the Spinal Tap analogy and I hate to ruin it, but like it's even worse than that, right? It's like 11 doesn't even come close to covering it. And, I mean, and one of the big problems here is that every 501c3 in the country has to file what's called a Form 990 with the IRS. So FFRF, who I work for, we file this Form 990 every year, and it tracks every penny that comes into the organization and every penny that goes out. And it's available on our website. People can go look it up, and they can see exactly how much money is coming from what and going to what. But churches don't have to file that. Every other charity in the country has to, but churches don't report any of that information. They are financial and informational black holes. Okay, so we have no idea what money comes in and goes out of churches already. And you pair that with the ability for them to get into politics, and you're just opening the floodgates for dark money, which will just be funneled to political campaigns through churches with zero financial transparency. Donors could give or tithe to churches in unlimited amount, and that could go, and it couldn't be tracked. There's just no way to know. So again, overturning the Johnson Amendment, getting rid of it, defunding the enforcement of it, however it's happening, would make Citizens United look trivial and nominal by comparison. Billions of dollars will go to churches, and they'll be able to use that to sway elections.
And how does that differ for like super PACs now versus what, I mean, could possibly happen? Like with the super PAC, if I donate to a super PAC, is that disclosed publicly anywhere, or is there a way to to stop some random company from just dumping millions of dollars into a super PAC
There are limits, and it depends on the gradations, right? For companies and individuals, and depends on what type of entity you're giving to. But the argument that's being made, the speech argument that churches are made, and the religious freedom argument that churches are made, I mean, carried to the very logical conclusion, there would be no way to track any of that through churches. And part of that makes a certain amount of sense, right? There is a separation of state and church, in part because the government's also not supposed to be interfering with churches. So we don't really necessarily want the government opening the church's books and looking through and figuring out where all their money is going. But again, that's also with the understanding that the churches aren't going to be getting involved in the government and into politics that way. So basically the church wants to have their cake and eat it too. And it would be a disaster. And everybody listening right now should be aware that the House of Representatives has already passed a budget bill that would defund the IRS's already somewhat anemic enforcement of the Johnson Amendment. And so right now, the only thing that has to happen is the Senate to pass a bill agreeing with the House bill, and the Johnson Amendment would go away. Because President Trump will, of course, sign it. He has promised to get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment. FFRF has sued him over his religious freedom order, in which he tried to gut the Johnson Amendment, but according to his own lawyers, didn't actually do anything. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about our commander-in-chief and his executive order, and yes, there we go. But he obviously has put his cards on the table of where he stands.
He has, and I think FFRF. So he signed this executive order, which was on religious freedom on the National Day of Prayer on May 4th. FFRF sued him that same day. Now, a lot of the other groups chose not to sue because everybody was worried about the leaked version of the executive order, which was leaked in January. Right. It's really awful language in it. It basically gave churches and religious employers a license to discriminate against gay people. Mm-hmm. And that didn't make it into the final order. So a lot of people, us included to a certain extent, were breathing this big sigh of relief, like, oh my gosh, this is good. This is a fight we don't have to have. But the Johnson Amendment stuff, the idea that he was gutting the Johnson Amendment in this order was still all there. And FFRF has sued the IRS over the Johnson Amendment already. So we were ready to go to court on that particular prong anyway. I think more so than some of the other groups were. So we did sue Trump the day he signed that order. And we got some really nice coverage from Washington Post and Politico about when his attorneys went into court and basically said, yeah, that executive order that Trump thinks does all this great stuff doesn't really do anything, which is an interesting argument to make. But if people are interested, I mean, if you go read our lawsuit, the reason Trump says he's doing this to benefit Christianity. He says it's going to be his greatest contribution to Christianity is gutting the Johnson Amendment. And again, it's because it's not letting them talk. It's going to give them money and power like they've never seen and like we've never seen in this country before.
So,
and to that extent,
yeah,
the IRS enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, I know you said it was anemic. I was under the understanding, because I forget who it was that I saw speak maybe a year ago about from Americans United for Separation of Church and State. From what I understand from that talk that he gave, it's something that just hasn't been enforced. Like the law's on the books, but they just don't do anything with it. Like, is that not true, or like what does that look like, or has there even been any type of enforcement of that?
So
in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfectly good question, especially for a skeptic to ask. And it has been lax, but there needs to be a distinction that we draw right between a lax enforcement and abolishing a law altogether, right? Because most drivers are still going to obey the speed limit, even if there are no speed traps set up to pull people over and enforce that law right away, right? I mean, the rule being in place is often enough to elicit the behavior that we want. And I think that is absolutely the case when it comes to the Johnson Amendment. So the lack of current enforcement doesn't necessarily actually alter a lot of the behavior the way you might think. That being said, when we sued the IRS, it was because they were not enforcing it at all. And in fact, the rules and regulations specify that a person at a certain level, so high enough in the IRS hierarchy, has to sign off on any church investigation under the Johnson Amendment. And they actually didn't have anybody that was capable of doing that in place. So we knew there was no way they were enforcing the Johnson Amendment, and it had been that way for more than a year. So when we sued, that forced them to hire people, and they actually did say that they have this list of churches that they're investigating. And we haven't necessarily seen anything shake out from that, but you also wouldn't hear about it because the IRS can't advertise and talk about that too. They'd actually be prohibited from doing that as well. So I think there's kind of 2 points there. It's a little bit of an area where we kind of don't know by design, and there's a big difference between it not being actively enforced and it not existing altogether.
And of course, churches aren't going to tell themselves. I mean, we have plenty of examples of churches not wanting to tattle on their bad behavior or
But
bad is
interestingly enough,
quotes.
FFRF has reported something like oh shoot, I don't remember the number now. I think maybe 70 churches that we think of engaged in electioneering, which is the technical term for violating the Johnson Amendment, since I think we began. And of course, we're hearing about that from churchgoers, right? Because our members aren't in church on Sunday morning to hear a sermon and endorse as a candidate. So a lot of the people who are sitting in the pews don't want their pastors and their preachers engaging in this kind of behavior.
So that leads me to a question. As I was thinking about this today, I assume that there are probably certain churches, religious denominations, maybe that would be really stoked if this gets repealed. But I was also wondering, to the contrary, are there churches and religious organizations that want to keep it in place? Yeah,
almost everybody does, actually. So our good friends at Americans United for the Separation of State and Church, they actually just delivered I think it was 4,000 letters from faith leaders from all around the country to members of Congress asking them to keep the Johnson Amendment in place. And in April, there was a letter that was signed by 4,500 national nonprofit organizations, including FFRF, urging Congress to protect the Johnson Amendment. And then my favorite was this study done by a Christian polling group called Lifeway Research. And their motto is Biblical Solutions for Life. And this
so we're stoning virgins and things like
yes,
that, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Except that even they
found get down with that. I mean, that sounds like a good time.
They found that 80% of Americans say it's inappropriate for pastors to endorse a candidate in church, and 75% thought it was completely inappropriate for churches to publicly endorse a candidate. Period. And
okay. Yeah. So that being said, all of these people are saying, why would we do away with this? We don't want to go to church and be talked to politically. Church leaders are saying we want to keep this in place. Why is this even up for discussion?
So if you look at the studies that have been done, there's one group that kind of stands out in all the polls as wanting this to be done, and that's evangelical Christians.
Evangelicals? No way!
No way! Yeah. Surprise!
Yeah.
No way.
And they tend to lean more one way than the other, but so their influence in Congress is disproportionate to their actual size, and so you get the sense from looking at all this polling and spending all this time deep in this mire that I'm in, that many groups probably wouldn't be endorsing political candidates anyway. And in fact, if you listen to some of the Catholic bishops and stuff talk, they actually say that their internal rules, Catholic Church rules, are actually stricter than the IRS rules, and they won't, which is kind of amazing if you think about it. But the evangelicals really stand out as, we would absolutely take advantage of this.
Yeah.
And if you look at which way they lean, FFRF is nonpartisan, in part because of the Johnson Amendment. But
we can say conservative though, because we're not. I mean, Natalie and I can. We know that you didn't.
Well, I mean,
let the record state.
There are facts that can be stated. So, for instance, the Pew did a study, and it looked at which religious sects lean which way in terms of religion, and of the 8 most Republican-leaning sects, 7 of those were evangelicals. The most Republican-leaning sect was the Mormons. Numbers 2 through 8 were all evangelical sects. So, I mean, you know which way the power and the money would flow in these elections as a result just of those just plain facts and plain numbers.
So, say I'm a person who cares about, women's health, reproductive rights, LGBT rights. I'm concerned if the Johnson Amendment goes away and political power is being used by evangelical Christians who, lean that way. So, don't want that to happen. How do we make that not happen?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of scary when you think about it. And I think another point to make too is it's not just political power, because the money that's going to flow into them, the billions of dollars, that is really not an exaggeration. It's dark and it's unaccountable, and who knows what they're going to spend that money on, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be politics that they spend this money on. It could be pregnancy crisis. Those pregnancy crisis centers, and I mean, who knows what they're going to be spending this money on? Facebook ads for the next election too. I mean, you never know. So,
yeah, so that's
their
a
own
concern
private army.
Because
if you're at the Church of Scientology,
well, right, because when you say that, I was thinking just politically and with candidates and all of that, but yeah, it's the social issues.
Yeah.
It's all of these things that I think should care about as people, just, humanists towards other people. And that's kind of fucking scary.
And I mean, don't even just think about lawmakers. Think about people who are running for school board. and churches can get involved in those elections. And think about people who are running for state Supreme Court. Many states have elected judges and elected local judges. You think about who's going to be deciding issues of religious freedom and redefining religious freedom to allow, for instance, a baker to discriminate against gay people. You know, I mean, this cuts across everything. And if we lose the Johnson Amendment, you know, I mean, it is going to be significantly harder for state-church separation and many of the issues that your listeners care about forever.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because it goes beyond just money, power, whatever. It really comes down to the church and state issue. And when the waters get even more muddy than they already are, because we know that they're already muddy. Like, we've had conversations, like, this is not the first time you've been on this show, because there's always something. You have a job because there is something always. Yeah. We have a climate that we need to keep talking about this stuff. And I guess for listeners who view this like we do, is there action that people can take to advocate for keeping this?
I mean, right now, the number one thing that needs to happen is this bill is before the Senate right now. And it's a budget bill, so it's even less sexy than just talking about the Johnson Amendment. But people need to contact their senators and get them to protect and enforce the Johnson Amendment, not defund it. FFRF put out an action alert. I believe we put it out on September 18th. Maybe you guys can link to it or send it out to everybody. That tells people how, and it walks you through, and it's very simple. You click on links, and we have talking points for you, so you don't have to remember all this stuff or go rewatch this. But it is critical that people actually reach out and call their senators. I know many people might not have done that before, but it does make a difference, a huge difference, more than you'll ever know.
Because it just seems like at this point, not just with this, but with anything, people who, maybe we've been quieter at other times, it seems like taking action and speaking up is really important right now.
It is. Look, I mean, you have a voice. This government belongs to we the people, right? Your voice counts and your voice matters. The only time it doesn't is if you don't use it. You have a voice, you have to use it. In fact, I'll go further. I'll say you have a duty to use it. Yeah. And as an American, you have a duty to use it.
As an American, that was a good Captain America, Atheist Captain America monologue at the end there, but it's true, because just thinking about what could happen if we don't.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the other side is using theirs. I mean, you think about the fact that 80% of the people in the country don't want this, and that Congress is still pushing it through. That's because they're hearing from the other side. They're hearing from that 20%. They're hearing from that vocal, in this case, minority that wants it passed. So it's time for us to speak up and let them hear the vocal majority.
I think that's a really good take-home message for everybody listening to actually take action on this time.
Yeah. I think so, and I really encourage everybody to go check out that action alert and write to your senator. Call your senator if you can. It's always better to call than write, but at the very least, shoot him an email.
Yeah, I think that's the plan, and we will share that with all of our social media audiences and all of that. Anything any good victories lately for Atheist Captain America and FFRF?
We've been doing quite a bit lately. We've been pissing off all the right people. One thing people should keep an eye out for is also scary that they might want to contact their senators about is Donald Trump nominated 2 people from a group called First Liberty, which is sort of like the anti-FFRF. Okay, like if you can imagine a group that's exactly opposed to everything we stand for, that's who this group is. For lifetime judicial appointments as federal judges in Texas, which is terrifying. I've been researching these guys and listening to them. We will have a big action alert on that probably early next week. It's scary stuff. So people need to probably act on that one too. I'll just come back on and we'll talk about that.
Just come back on. Because,
right. I was going to say, this is the Andrew Seidel podcast featuring.
I'm sorry, guys.
But this is the state of the world that we need to keep putting these conversations out there, because otherwise it's all just it's all just going without people doing anything.
Right. There's so much, and there's so much noise out there. There's so many different things to be agitated over and to get upset about, and it's hard to prioritize for a lot of people, and it's much easier just to turn your computer off, put down your phone, and go about your day. But these are, I mean, like you're saying, lifetime appointments to things are that goes far beyond just let's give Trump a chance. Well, I can't say Trump. Let's give him a chance. Give that individual a chance. And I mean, because that's a long time. I don't know if you know, a lifetime is a long time.
It's a long time.
Science facts.
Yeah.
Especially when they're barely 50 years old. So, yeah. All right, so, but I have to run. I'm getting buzzed. We're having a big brainstorming session.
All right, and I'm gonna go pick up some children and take them to eat pizza. That's my.
Well, and so if we want to follow, read, and do other things to and with you, how would we go about doing that?
Well, everybody should join FFRF, ffrf.org/join. That's the best way. And then I have some personal Twittering and Facebooking I do that I'm sure I pop up across your guys' feeds from time to time. It's often Andrew Seidel. So it's always fun chatting with you.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
All right.